Okay,
Lovely.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Just some few housekeeping rules. Kindly keep your device muted until you're asked to ask a question. So please ensure you're muted. You can turn on your videos because it's going to bring a lot of interaction and a lot of fun and excitement. So turn on your videos, but please turn your mic off so that we do not hear any background sound coming in. Thank you very much. We're just going to continue with some more housekeeping rules. Please introduce yourselves. Very important.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Abdulam. Can I proceed?
Yeah, but I would like us to do the introduction in the chat if that's okay.
Okay, it's okay. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. So at the end of today, the things we're going to cover is the urgency to finance loss and damage and its major challenges, and also understand the current progress on the UNFCCC negotiations in loss and damage, as well as knowing the loss and damage included in NDCs, current initiatives, and also learning about the lessons from Pakistan flood and possible ways for young people to increase the momentum, to increase the growing momentum in loss and damage in the lead up to COP27. Before we just introduce our speakers, we're going to watch a video on loss and damage impact in Nepal. And this was brought together by Shreya, that's the contact point for the NDCs working group. So over to you, Shreya.
Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, I'll share the screen. Just give me a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'll play the audio, but if there's any problem, please let me know.
We can't hear the audio, Shreya.
Yeah. Can you hear the audio?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Can you just give me a minute? Is it audible?
Yes.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
I feel so proud to be from Nepal, where people live in harmony with nature. But the climate crisis is hitting my beautiful homeland, pushing us beyond our ability to cope. The Himalayan glaciers are melting and feeding the lakes that burst and sweep away entire villages. Downstream communities can lose their lives and property in an instant. Persistent threat is terrifying. Our efforts to build stone walls to protect forest cover and villages can't hold back climate change. As in other least developed countries, most Nepali people depend on agriculture for their livelihood, which makes us extremely vulnerable to climate change, though we have done the least to cause it. My family used to farm, but no matter how hard we tried, we produced so little. It's getting warmer and new diseases are affecting crops. Like many others, we had to move to find new opportunities. Now I live in town, but here too, more intense monsoon rain causes destructive floods. Reduced harvest puts pressure on men's role in our patriarchal society. Drought has forced women to travel longer distance for firewood and water. making them vulnerable to sexual exploitation. Many girls drop out of their school or are married off to cope with food scarcity. I'm afraid and sad that this changes risk our society's stability. World leaders must recognize the loss and damage hitting the least developed countries and take increased action by providing finance and technical support. The vicious cycle of loss and damage we face due to climate change must end now. Back to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Shreya. That's a beautiful video. So I'm sure we're going to have this link shared on the chat. So if anyone wants to have a look at it, subscribe, share everything. So thank you so much, Shreya. This is really beautiful. And we are hoping that everyone is inspired to do some, because loss and damage, as you know, affects not just Nepal, but a lot of countries in Global South. So thank you so much for sharing that. So to recap what I said before our speakers come on board, we're just going to understand more about the agency to finance loss and damage and its major challenges, current progress on the UNFCCC negotiations in loss and damage included in NDCs, current initiatives, and lessons from Pakistan flood, and the possible ways for young people to increase the growing momentum in loss and damage in the lead up to COP27. So thank you so much. I'm going to invite our first speaker, Mr. Sunil Akaya. I'm so sorry if I don't pronounce it well. I'd love you to teach me. He is the Regional Policy and Campaigns Coordinator for Asia at Oxfam International. And his presentation is going to be on understanding loss and damage and significant to achieving the NDC targets. We're so glad to have you, Mr. Sunil. Over to you.
Thank you, Margaret, and thanks everyone. Thank you for having me today, and also for the opportunity to share my experience on this very important issue. I think I have the permission to share my screen. I'll go do that. I don't know how it works. Let me try. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes, you can.
And is it the full screen, or is it full screen?
No, it's not full screen. You're just showing all
Okay,
of the
then
PowerPoint. Yes.
okay. Let me try it again. Can you see it now, full screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do today is to provide you all a brief introduction of what loss and damage is, though I suspect that many of you already know it. And then I will go on to a brief description of how this issue has been negotiated within the UNFCCC. Then I'll go on to tell you about what which countries NDCs talk about the issue of loss and damage and which do not. And then I'll go on to talk about what needs to happen next, most importantly in the 6 weeks time in Egypt, where COP27 is happening. So I'll start with this introduction of loss and damage and why we need to talk about this. Basically, as you all just saw the video that Shreya narrated, basically the issue of loss and damage refers to a situation where the climate crisis makes us, our communities or people not being able to do anything about it. So it's the consequences wherein people are not able to adapt to, or it's a stage where there is no adaptation or there are limitations to adaptation. So when it happens when the climate impacts overwhelm all the efforts that communities or people take to adapt, or also at the instance where the action was not taken to prevent those impacts. So they are broadly categorized as unavoidable or unavoided. So there can be impacts which cannot be avoided. For example, the video you saw, the glacial melting resulting into the glacial lake outburst flood. So the impact that come in from that flooding event, sweeping away all the landmass, sweeping away the houses and the farmlands of the communities residing in there, but also downstream, cannot be reclaimed. So that is the situation which cannot be avoided. Or there can be situations wherein people are not able to prepare better. That usually happens because there are no resources to take the necessary actions beforehand. So that's what loss and damage is. So loss and damage can be of two types. Everybody after the disasters hears about this much million or billion of damages that happened. So that's the economic term. So the destruction of the infrastructure or the destruction of property or crops, etc., can be measured in economic terms. So they are referred to as the economic loss and damage, or economic losses and damages. But there is another aspect, the non-economic side, loss of life, which cannot be valued in economic terms. The loss of culture or the loss of way of living that people have been observing for ages, or the loss of biodiversity which cannot be reclaimed. Those kind of losses are termed as non-economic, which do not get as much attention as the economic losses and damages, but they are very critical from the perspective of the human or personal or social side, because the trauma, for example, one gets after a big disaster event cannot be measured by anything. The school kid who has to abandon studying and go somewhere to get the food or a meal, how can you value that in economic terms? So it's really important that when we talk about loss and damage, we are also talking about non-economic losses and damages. So the loss and damage can happen from two types of events. We talk about disasters, these weather events, the climate events, etc. There can be two, basically two types. One, the extreme weather events that everyone talks about, example, the floods, the cyclones or heat waves, and all these big events that make the headlines. But there are also slow onset processes and weather events, for example, sea level rise or glacial melt or desertification or ocean acidification, which take a longer time horizon to happen. So we are witnessing those type of events are also resulting in loss and damage. For example, the sea level rise happens over a long period of time, but it can result in a vanishing of an island country or island nation. The glacial melt, as I told earlier, can result into an extreme events that is a blow, but it takes several amount of time. But even those slow onset processes are now happening rapidly. For example, the rate of glacial melt is increasing, rate of sea level rise is increasing. We are at a situation wherein there will be a time where we cannot distinguish between what is extreme weather event and what is a slow onset process. So that is the situation we are in terms of loss and damage. So I'll go on to give you a few examples of the loss and damage events, or the events, the disaster events we can term as loss and damage. And in this slide, if you see, I've only listed economic losses. So I tried to, gather in information about some of the bigger events that happened from 2015 to 2021. And you know, this slide doesn't include the Pakistan floods that happened recently, or the South African flood that happened you know, a few months earlier in year 2022. So what you can see here is that the climate crisis has come to this point, which is increasing the frequency and magnitude of disaster events. So, you know, just to, you know, highlight a few, for example, this, you know, flood event in Peru in 2017, if you look, that caused an economic loss and damage amounting to 3.16 billion. But if you look into the storm the same year that happened in Puerto Rico and Dominica, that caused the economic loss of over 70 billion. So that means for those countries, it's a significant amount of their gross domestic product, or this their economic size. So what this also shows is that the number of such disastrous events are increasing, and also the economic impact are growing. But what you cannot see from this figure is the non-economic you know, impacts. For example, loss of life. I didn't list the number of lives lost. For example, you know, the cyclone Amphan in South Asia in 2020 had you know, resulted in loss of several you know, lives of several people. You know, these events have like resulted in lives lost to around you know, some events have caused thousands of people to die. So, and we've not also, you know, we don't get the figures around what all the other, you know, non-economic cost that you know, these events resulted in. For example, the families that had to be separated, the community or the households that had to be displaced and leave their you know, village forever and go elsewhere. So those kind of events we're not talking about here. But what I'm trying to say is that if you look into the available data, what it has shown is that one of the indicators of rising loss and damage is the rising humanitarian needs. Once the disaster you know, event happens, there is this UN agency who you know, calls for appeals, does an appeal to help people in that particular area where that disaster hit, area or a country, and you know, ask for international support, which is known as humanitarian assistance. So if you look into this research which Oxfam recently did, over the last 20 years, the number of you know, appeals related to these extreme weather events has risen by 8-fold. So that means the appeals have been made 8 times more. That is like, if you know, in 20 years back, if it was 1, then it's 8 now. So the number of you know, appeals being made. But what is happening is that the amount of money that you know, has come in to you know, help these communities who have been battered by those you know, extreme events is tiny. I'll give you an example of Pakistan. Everybody knows what has happened in Pakistan. We've got figures, some say it's 10 billion, but the more realistic figures are over 30 billion of losses and economic losses and damages. But what is happening is, you know, the UN just made an appeal of around 160 million. So the loss and damage was at the scale of 30 billion, but the appeal was just about 150 million. But you know, I'm not sure if even you know, 20 million has been provided so far to Pakistan to deal with this crisis. So that's the situation we are living in with. So what we can say is that loss and damage will increasingly harm the vulnerable communities the most. The people in the front line will have to bear the cost most, though they didn't do anything to cause this. So it is addressing loss and damage is vital. It's an issue of climate justice. So it's a critical aspect of climate justice that should be upheld. So with this, I'll now go into a bit of a history of where this started and what is happening within the United Nations process, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So some of you might know, but many of you would be surprised to know that this issue was raised 1 year before the UNFCCC was agreed. That was in 1991. The UNFCCC was agreed in 1992 during the Rio conference, but while that convention was being drafted, the small island developing states raised this issue that some of the climate impacts will be such that those nations will not be able to adapt. So for that, they wanted mechanisms in which they are compensated and there is support to plan, for example, for relocation if the island nation is submerged. So it's an issue that is being raised by vulnerable developing countries for 30 years now. But the fact is that it has remained a taboo topic within the negotiations. It is considered politically toxic. The developed countries do not want to talk about it. If they were, if they could have been able to succeed, they would have kept away this discussion of loss and damage even now, because some of you might have heard the US climate envoy, John Kerry, talking about it's not necessary to finance loss and damage. Just this week in the United Nations General Embassy side events in New York. So that is the situation or the perspective that the developed countries have. But there are a few progresses that have happened within the UNFCCC. For example, starting with the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage that was created in 2013 during the Conference of Parties that happened in Poland in Warsaw. So this body is supposed to make progress on the issue of loss and damage, especially in providing support to developing countries to tackle climate-induced losses and damages. This body is basically this is a body which has an executive committee representing this the people from both developed and developing countries, but they are basically the full-time staffs in the government agencies doing their work on their own work, but they meet several times in a year and during the UNFCCC conferences and talk about the issue of loss and damage, including developing a work plan, and then also organizing workshops basically to understand what the issue of loss and damage is. What I'm trying to say is that because of the way the executive committee is structured, it's not able to work at the scale that is required. So after 2013, during when Paris Agreement was adopted in COP21, the loss and damage got its own recognition as a third pillar within the agreement. In addition to mitigation and adaptation, loss and damage was included as a separate pillar. So this was the first time that was that happened within any convention or agreement. For example, it was not mentioned in the UNFCCC convention itself. It was not mentioned in Kyoto Protocol, which many of you know, but in 2015 in Paris Agreement, it was recognized as and included as a separate pillar in Article 8 of the agreement. So that was a significant progress, but it came with a footnote. It was also mentioned in a footnote in the agreement text that though, the issue of loss and damage has been included in the agreement. It mentions that the developing countries cannot raise the issue of liability or compensation, which I think is the basic core of the issue of loss and damage. That means people cannot raise or cannot go demand that loss and damage finance or action on loss and damage should be binding to developed, support to loss and damage is binding to developed countries. It excludes that through that footnote, which is an unjust provision, which was agreed then in 2015. Then this Warsaw International Mechanism also created several expert groups and task forces, including a task force on displacement, expert groups on migration, looking into non-economic loss and damages, slow onset processes, and also an expert group on action and support to identify what kind of action is required and what kind of support the developing countries require. So, but these committees, what they do is they convene, they organize workshops, they have their work plan, but it's only at the level of UNFCCC, but nothing is happening where loss and damage is happening. Then coming to 2019 in Madrid, so in this COP25, a network named as Santiago Network on Loss and Damage was agreed. Basically, during that COP, the developing countries were demanding a body which is able to provide technical support to vulnerable developing countries to address loss and damage, but also provide financing for that. But the Santiago Network was agreed as a technical body, which would invite when there is when there is a request for technical assistance from developing countries, it would invite other organizations to provide that technical assistance. So it's kind of a body which tries to do a matchmaking between who needs assistance and who are able to provide that assistance. But the functions and modalities of that network have not been fully agreed yet. In COP26 in Glasgow, the parties were able to come up with a compromise in identifying the functions of that network, but the network is still not operational. There are still many issues still need to be resolved, which is being negotiated in COP27 in Egypt. Then in Glasgow itself, the developing countries had demanded that a body to finance loss and damage is established. They made a specific proposal to establish loss and damage finance facility in Glasgow, but at the end of the COP, what was agreed was just to set up a dialogue process, to talk about loss and damage. It doesn't even clearly say whether it will be discussing loss and damage finance. So that's where we come. In terms of, I showed you in the previous slide, the needs are rising. Communities are suffering loss and damage. But if you look into the UNFCCC financing mechanism, there is $0 or 0 rupee, if I may say. I'm coming from Nepal. So, money allocated to funding loss and damage or addressing loss and damage. So that's the situation we are in. Though you might also have heard about, a recent announcement from Denmark. They said that they have allocated 100 million for loss and damage specific, and it is additional to their development aid. So that's 100 million again is a good precedent set up by the government of Denmark, but all the other developed countries need to step up and put the money for loss and damage finance. Similarly, last year, during the negotiations in Glasgow for loss and damage, the philanthropies, some of the philanthropies, announced that they would be, willing to contribute finance for loss and damage if a facility was to be established. So they have announced that, and they have allocated that money, and that money is being now channeled through a few different channels. Similarly, the Scottish government, which is under the United Kingdom, also announced loss and damage finance. So these are some of the movements, some of the happenings around loss and damage finance. But again, that's not within the UNFCCC mechanism that anything has been agreed on this. So the key demand going to the COP27 that will happen in Egypt is the establishment of loss and damage finance facility, which I'll come a bit later. So, okay. So after this, I'll talk briefly about what is the situation with NDCs when you talk about loss and damage. I hope everyone knows what NDC is, because I was told that this is the fourth, seminar in the series on the capacity building on the nationally determined contributions for youth. But what I would say briefly is that nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, are the primary action plans that countries put together and share it with the UNFCCC. So, there was this process to understand what every country is, doing in terms of taking climate action. And then it was decided that NDCs could be one of the vehicles through which countries share their plans to take climate action. But what I would like to highlight here is that the NDCs are primarily focused on mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So this is basically about what actions can countries take to reduce greenhouse gas emission and limit temperature rise, where they are in terms of the progress to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is so vital for the humanity, but also for the planet. It is strange that loss and damage is not required to be included, in the NDCs. So the Paris Agreement or its rule book, which was decided later, doesn't require countries to include loss and damage in their NDCs. But as I told you, the climate crisis, it is at this stage wherein reducing greenhouse emissions or implementing measures to adapt will not be sufficient, because the negative impacts have already been locked in the climate system. So no matter if all the countries came together and decided that, okay, they would take the drastic actions that are required to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius right away today, but even if that happened, the loss and damage will continue to, impact people going forward, because we've created a situation in which, the impacts are already locked in. So addressing loss and damage, as we, came to know, it's so vital. That means it should not be isolated from the broader climate action, which is mitigation or adaptation. So loss and damage should be part of the package of climate actions that include mitigation, that include adaptation, and also obviously loss and damage. But there is situation for some countries which can do so much about mitigating climate change because their emissions are negligible. They do not emit, I don't mean that they do not emit anything, but their emission levels are so tiny that there is no scope to do a lot of mitigation work. But vulnerable developing countries can do more on adaptation, need to do more on adaptation, and most critically need support to address loss and damage. So it is vital that they can include these issues in the NDCs. And including loss and damage in the NDCs is also very much necessary as a policy measure to drive climate actions at the national level, because as of now, most of the discourse even in the developing countries is around mitigation or around adaptation. loss and damage discourse needs to, happen more. So it should increase. That's the point we are at. So, and why including loss and damage in NDCs is important is because we can understand, we can know whether greenhouse gas emissions are being, reduced through, countries' action plans in doing that. So that, that is communicated, and we get to know that, oh, okay, because the greenhouse gas emission is being reduced, this is the progress towards delivering the goals of Paris Agreement. But at the same time, if the loss and damage is increasing, if the loss and damage events are escalating, and that is a clear indicator of the failure of the Paris Agreement. So that is the reason we need to, give more emphasis on addressing loss and damage. So it's about, it's about integrating loss and damage in NDC so that there is an increased momentum and there is increased focus on addressing this critical issue. But having said that, so, what has happened? Let's look at some figures and statistics. The statistics I'm presenting here is from, late 2021. But it doesn't make a lot of difference. There are a few countries which have revised their NDCs or have submitted their enhanced NDCs, but mostly in terms of loss and damage, it remains the same. So if you look into the NDCs that have been submitted, of the 162 NDCs submitted, only 52 provide a mention of loss and damage, and it's, it is counted as loss and damage is there in NDC, even if there is a single word loss and damage mentioned. So it's only 52 countries who have mentioned loss and damage in their NDCs. Out of that, 54% of those NDCs which mention loss and damage are from small island developing states or LDCs. So the majority of NDCs submitted by the small island developing states or the LDCs mention loss and damage, slightly more than half. But if you look into the subcategory within that, the states are far ahead and LDCs lag behind. It's only about 17% of the NDCs coming from the least developed countries that have any mention of loss and damage. If you look into the geographical distribution, different regional groups, 40% of the Latin American and the Caribbean, NDCs have mention of loss and damage. In Asia Pacific, it is about 38%. And if you look into Africa figures, it's only 14%. But there is no mention of loss and damage from the NDCs coming from high income countries. The developed countries such as the US or others don't talk about loss and damage. What this is saying is two things. One, the developed countries don't want to talk about it. We know that. That's why they have not put it in their NDCs. But for developing countries, for example, why the figure is so low from Africa, it is also about the capacities. It's also about the guidance and support it requires to include loss and damage in their NDCs. So we have two situations wherein there is no support for the countries who might want to incorporate loss and damage in their NDCs, and on the other side, the developed countries want to take it off. So, yeah, going into a bit more of a detail. Only, I talked about the mention of loss and damage. There was 52 countries out of 162, but only 23% of NDCs which have mentioned loss and damage have a separate loss and damage section. For example, I'm not sure how many of you have looked into the NDC submitted by countries. It's basically there is a template provided by the UNFCCC, it talks about the plans to reduce emissions from different sources and sectors. Countries add in a different chapter on adaptation, but only 23% of the countries or the NDCs coming from these countries have a separate loss and damage section. That means the issue is raised in detail, and countries have put forward some of the plans or actions that will take, or the support that they will require to address loss and damage. So some of the examples of the loss and damage actions that have been mentioned. So they talk about the need for international finance to address loss and damage, or the assurance or the willingness to create national level loss and damage finance or risk transfer mechanisms. They also talk about, some of them also talk about, they will create national level institutions to address loss and damage. But many of those NDCs talk about knowledge generation, to understand what loss and damage is in their particular context, to, be able to assess the ongoing and future loss and damage, do the needs assessment, and etc. So it's all about that. So we don't have NDCs which are very in depth, and particularly talking about what concrete actions that they will be taking. So I'm towards the end of my presentation. So I know the colleague from Pakistan will talk more about the situation that is happening at the moment, and its importance and the significance, or the unfortunate situation that the country is facing, and the urgent need to work on loss and damage, to address loss and damage, and have that financing facility, so that countries or people suffering like in Pakistan, get that vital support. So just to give you a picture of sometimes what we hear is that there is no resources to deal with this crisis. But if you look into some of the figures, we know that the people on the front lines are suffering more and more, but the fossil fuel corporations, the big companies, are profiting in record numbers. Their profits are rising despite people having to suffer. So it's not about the money, but the political will. As you might have observed from the fact that it's the developed countries who do not want to talk about it. So if you look into the figures again, in 2021, the cost of the 10 most disastrous climate events was around 170 billion US. But at the same year, the 25 fossil fuel companies made the profit of 205 billion. Look at the number. So it's not that there is no money. It's the fact that the polluters are not paying. So going to COP27, and as many of you might have participated in the loss and damage action day yesterday, so we have very clear demands. So you might be surprised that the issue of loss and damage itself is not in the agenda. It's not. We are not sure if it will get the space to be debated in a way that it should get that space within the discussion in COP27. So it's always a fight that developing countries have to fight, wherein they want to have that space to discuss about loss and damage, because at the moment it's about the report of the Warsaw International Mechanism, the Glasgow dialogue that was set up in Glasgow last year, had a few meetings in between, but it did not be discussed in COP27. So we are in a, but there will be some discussions around Santiago network, but the amount of the details or the time it requires to discuss the gravity of the issue is not given. So there's a demand to put loss and damage as a permanent agenda item within the COP process. So then the most critical demand is to establish loss and damage finance facility. And what does this mean is that there is this facility in which the polluters, the rich countries and corporations will have to put money so that that can be channeled to countries, developing countries or communities who are facing loss and damage. So far, what we've seen within the UNFCCC process is that whenever, for example, if you want to implement a mitigation project, for example, installing solar energy in rural villages in, for example, Nepal, then you have to write a proposal to get that money. If you want to implement an adaptation project, then you have to write a proposal to get that money that is available in, it's not enough, but whatever is available, it, you have to write proposals and do all sort of, work to get that money. But for loss and damage, when loss and damage happens, for example, in Pakistan, Pakistani people are not, we can't put them in a situation wherein, like, they have to start writing proposals to get that money, right? So it's about justice. So it's about getting, the people suffering loss and damage, getting that money from that facility in a way that is just and equitable. So it's that fact we are asking for that facility, because many of the mechanisms we have at the moment, including the UNFCCC climate finance mechanism, we need to write proposals. There are, channels, for example, humanitarian assistance that is a charity. Givers can decide who to give and who to not give. We don't want that situation in which people are left behind. So this is the money we want, that is in the form of solidarity, that is in the form in which people, there is the adequacy of support. It's not about getting a tiny amount of charity from so-called developed countries. So basically, we are asking for the polluters to pay for what they caused, for the loss and damage they caused, and then the hashtag that is being used is pay up for loss and damage, which was the highlight of yesterday. With this, I'll end it here. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be very happy to respond to any question that you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sunil. Pay up for loss and damage. Thank you so much. This is very enlightening. It's very important for us to understand that it goes beyond applying for climate finance, because then, like you said, polluters are determining who to give the money to based on what is there. But now we want people to give what is supposed to be given because of what they are suffering because of their actions. Thank you so much again for enlightening us. Please note down all your questions. We will come to question and answer section. So you can just write it down so you do not forget. We're moving to Iqbal Badruddin. I hope I mentioned your name right. He's the founder for Friday for Future Pakistan. And he's going to speak about loss and damage from Pakistan, a very practical and realistic point of view. So over to you, Iqbal.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Sunil, for such an informative, presentation with all the facts and figures. And of course, I'd like to thank Shreya for, what the animated video she was in. That was something that I always used to think that we need to come out of the box and do something like that to reach the audience. So that was so informative. But thanks everyone for being here. Yes, the situation in Pakistan is not good as it seems, but these floods are, for me, it's like 5 meteorological disasters in one go. Number one, a lot of countries are thinking that the glaciers have been melting in Pakistan, but that's not the case. The torrential rains have caused the damage in Pakistan. And in some areas, 900% heavier rain has caused compared to what we have had since 1980. So that's how we see climate change has shown that what it can do and how the magnitude can be increased, because whatever it's happening, the people there, they don't really know even now what happened to them. So for that, we need to know that the countries that are causing climate change, the greenhouse gas emissions, should actually work not on loss and damage, but also sharing the knowledge, which is the power for the people. And this shows that people in Pakistan, they have less adaptive capacity to actually fight back or even plan about what's going to happen in the future. Um, uh, we are not safe unless everybody's safe, and this should have been done before, because the problem is that it involves human suffering, and it also involves that an economy which is slowing down time to time, and once it's slowing down, it shows that the more it slows down, the more vulnerable the community is going to be. Um, and especially in the case of Pakistan, and I could say that other my fellows that who are in this call would know that case of poverty and climate vulnerability are two sides of the same coin. Um, it's something that we need to work on climate vulnerability, but at the same time we need to work on the poverty. And the more poverty is increasing, the more adaptive capacity is going down, and which will not only increase the frequency of billion-dollar disasters, but it will also have priceless values. Like Sunil said, that the life lost are not even included in the loss and damages. Of course, we cannot include that, we are not going to get back all the people that we have lost. Um, but yes, inclusiveness is something that not only domestically, I think Pakistan would need to work on the communities, because here is the fact that the people who are actually suffering and have suffered are the ones who were always put out of the dialogue. They were never put into the phase where their say were taken, or they were the people that were living in the rural areas. They never know what the policy, the promotion of the federal government were making. And this came up now to the situation where Pakistan has to present this disaster in the COP27 and the NDCs that we have to present before the COP27, as an opportunity to ask for the loss and damage. Now, we need to make sure that whatever this is, we need to whatever this is, we need to make sure that the argument for Pakistan is to seek finance for loss and damage instead of seeking for liability and compensation. Uh, a lot of developed countries could possibly provide these funds not because of their legal liability, but because supporting vulnerable communities and countries face unavoidable threats from climate change caused by their unsustainable economic development. Um, but since Sunil shared that the loss and damage, according to the government of Pakistan, is $10 billion, some say it's $30 billion, it might go above because the water is still there. There is some areas that the nature has shown that there is no gravity flow and the water is there. There is no way out that how they would actually come out of that situation. But islands across islands in Pakistan have shown that situation is bad. The international community, the UN, for example, asked for $150 million just for a peanut. Uh, I don't think so. How the Secretary General was so confident of asking $150 million, knowing that the damage is going to increase day by day, and we haven't got anything except for people working inside domestically and some individuals sending money for donation. This is the irony that Pakistan is facing right now. But I see that the disaster, this wave of disasters, is an opportunity. Whatever happened has happened. Um, of course, we blame the developed countries, but I also blame the government of Pakistan to, what happened is because of their policies, is because of their political instability, from decades, which created this mess. And a government has a very big say in increasing the adaptive capacity of the people. So those people who are well off, no, less than 1% of those were impacted by these floods. Why? Because they increased their capacity to fight such disasters. But for me, I think the South Asian nations and the other countries that are not even hit by such things, right, could actually take help from such disasters. But the situation comes here is like, who is going to pay for the loss and damage? What about the emerging high polluters such as China, which is still considered a developing country, but emits about a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, like more than double the annual emissions of US? I think we are missing it. The China might shun the COP27. Who's going to ask them? Nobody's going to ask them. the US is still there. They need to play their, um, hegemony in the world just to be at the COP, to try to, show the world that they are the superpower and they are here. But I see that, ignoring such big countries like China is also a problem for countries like Pakistan, India, Nepal, and other developing countries and underdeveloping countries, because the economic growth China is, indulged right now is gonna make the situation even more worse in the coming future. And we need to make sure that the policing system, um, like which court should decide on compensatory amount, given there is no climate courts equipped to deal with discussions. So if there is no climate courts globally, such countries would actually exceed their limit of emissions. And perhaps most important, it is the legal precedent that a rich nation explicitly compensated developing nations for loss due to climate change. Legally, I think compensation is paid, for me, as Sunil said, that it's paid by a person, organization, or country to a victim. So if rich countries begin to pay compensation, would it become a bottomless pit? I don't know, but we have put the loss and damage in such a frame that it's something that our rich is also always going to give to the poor, but also going to continue its way of operating in their country. And this is why this topic of compensation is sort of fraught and contentious, despite its popularity with some leader of the developing nations and climate justice advocate. I think the legal complexity and potentially enormous sums involved means that it's never likely to get the transaction. And I know we will be seeing like increased funding and ambition for climate adaptation and disaster response post for COP27. But given the climate finance as it's known, the difference here is the funding is being given willingly. But at present, climate finance is not flowing anywhere near the levels needed, and we need to increase that level. We need to change the frame that victimize the countries that are suffering. And they are not the victims, they are the byproduct of the economic development of the rich nation. And since Pakistan is still underwater, no, if I don't know, but I heard a call where a local person from Sindh province, which is like half of the province is underwater right now. They called the National Disaster Management Authority again and again, and once they picked up, their request for them was to drop a bomb on their village, because they were like, we are suffering and we don't need anything from you guys except the bomb, because we don't want to suffer like this. So the situation is, in the last presentation, that the peanuts that were promised by the international community is not even received by Pakistani community, and the people are suffering. It's just the post-disaster, the traumatic conditions, and the waterborne diseases is actually increasing their situation, which are leading the people to do suicide in those areas. Because what are you going to do? People are afraid of dying of hunger, and people are afraid of drawing in the water. So this is something, the situation is getting worse. uh, Personally, the past record of the international community have shown that they only make fake promises, and when it comes to doing something, they actually go back. So even though I was optimistic about the COVID, that it might have taught us something to do well with disasters, but I think if something is not touching us, we will not react, and we will only do something if it's outside our doors. So the loss and damage system and how the countries are going to deal with it is still unknown, given the fact that Denmark have announced to pay its role. Where are the countries that are actually causing it? I don't think so. uh, they are still up to the mark. They don't see that the negotiation and strong opinions on compensation payments and finance for loss and damage is really important right now. Because if such thing has happened in Pakistan, every country is busy, especially the developed country is busy right now in actually fencing themselves to get save themselves in the future. So I think my concern would be such countries that have shunned the last COP should be part of the COP27 process. They should actually come out and share the profit they are making out of this emission, and they have to pay whatever they are liable to pay to such countries. And it's not just about that we wait for a country to get drawn. by this disaster. We need to set up for those countries that are vulnerable. And since climate change is unpredictable right now, so we don't know what's going to happen with Nepal or India or Bangladesh. So it's better to learn from other countries and come out, take this opportunity uh, to actually fight back climate change, because the adaptation is now what the only option we have got. Personally, I believe no developed countries is going to work on mitigation in the coming decades. The main concern for developed countries is right now is to feed their people, make retain their status, and which is going to help themselves, but not the countries that are actually suffering. So it's a very complex issue right now for loss and damage when it comes to Pakistan, but it is very clear that climate finance needs to ramp up and spend effectively. It must be pragmatic and practical, moving away from politicized debate over loss and damage and compensation in favor of making sure people on the ground, such as the million left without homes in Pakistan, can help get help and access to good water, food, and security. But yes, I think it's what COP will do is also make a discourse of what's going to happen in the future. But I think what's happening in COP would only be effective, and what we can see in future on ground would be only the 10% promises that the past COP has shown. But the only thing left, I could say, is the young people coming up, making noise, because we are the one who's going to take charge in the future. So if these leaders are not going to leave anything beyond, we won't be able to do anything for the coming generation that we might see. So it's our responsibility, and all I could say is like pray for the people who are suffering right now. And one day, I think we might be able to come up with a solution that could actually help us live in a world where climate is changing. But yes, it's sort of a very big dialogue and discourse that we're creating. But yeah, thank you for providing me this platform.
Thank you so much, Iqbal. Thank you so much for your inspiring words, and I hope anyone who is facing some issue of loss and damage will be able to come out just like you are and be able to stand and ensure that the right people do the right thing to ensure that people have what they deserve, because economic losses, of course, can be compensated, but what about the non-economic losses? What are we doing even to avoid those things? So thank you so much again, Iqbal. Our next speaker is Aruba Farouk. She's a 16-year-old climate and environmental activist for Bangladesh, and she is the Deputy National Coordinator of YouthNet for Climate Justice. She is the youngest climate petitioner in Bangladesh. We're so honored to have you, Aruba. Over to you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me here. I'm just so honored to be part of this distinguished assemblage. So first of all, I would like to, about loss and damage, I like to say that without loss and damage, climate justice is completely impossible. Loss and damage is the first part of ensuring climate justice. We are all in the same crisis, but we are not in the same boat. Some people are in the ship and some people are in the sinking boat. I feel that the global climate south in case of the climate crisis is in the sinking boat. We are suffering from emissions, while the 92% of the carbon emissions come from the richest countries. And the global south is not poor. It has been made poor by the global north through colonialism, through capitalism. So this climate crisis is an awfully unequal crisis. There is no equality in this crisis. The people who are polluting the most are not suffering that. They are polluting more. And who are suffering from the loss and damage? We from the global south are suffering from the loss and damage. Yet we do not. Yet when you talk about loss and damage, they say that we are talking too much. We are asking for too much. It's not justified. We are not asking for too much. In fact, I say that when we ask for loss and damage and private finance, we ask for too less. Usually, the loss and damage we understand is mostly called economic loss and damage. But fact is, you can't really explain or fulfill the mourning of a person whose family member has died. You can't really pay up for a child's psychological issue when they face a climate disaster. You can't pay up for those. So we are only asking for the economic losses, the losses we can define with. The actual loss and damage in a crisis is undefined. We can't define it with words, with speeches, with programs, or with anything, even not with money, because we cannot eat or drink money, of course. So when I talk about young youth here, young people are, of course, the most important stakeholders. And I feel that in this COP27, young people should be sitting in the negotiations tables, deciding and negotiating about on this COP27. Yeah, I think there are ways for the young people. If the system change, we cannot say change the system, but we must change. We must change our systems, which must uproot the current system that is going on, and bring youth in the negotiation tables, bring young people in the COP27. When I come to the COP27, I'd also like to point out another thing, that is mostly we see if you youth in the COP27, but we do not see children like me. I'm clearly a child. So in that case, it is mostly like youth representing the children, but it shouldn't be like this. It should be children representing themselves in the negotiation tables. Unfortunately, children are not being allowed, especially from the global south, to attend the COP27. How the youth can decide, or how the adults can decide the children's future without asking what about their demands. Yes, it might be like that the older people have more experience, they have more knowledge, but children have a view. They have experience too, especially from the global south. And so it should be children representing themselves in the youth, and youth representing themselves in the COP27. When it comes to loss and damage, the topic of loss and damage should not be whispered anymore. It is not a taboo issue. It is not unreal. It is a real burning issue that should be addressed right now, right here. Loss and damage is certainly one of the first and foremost things we should be focusing on right now in the coming COP27. COP27 is happening in the Africa, when Africa emits only 1.1% of the global climate emission. It suffers from more than 40% of the total climate disasters. Then why should they? Why should they suffer from this when they are innocent? This is the time when the rich countries, when the polluted countries should bend to the poor countries and ensure loss and damage, climate justice, and finance with equity and equality. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Aruba. That was very inspiring. And it's really, really, really good when we see people as young as you are understanding these things and bringing out your thoughts. Yes, I do agree that the adults should not be deciding for the children. They should be there themselves to ensure that the adults are saying the right thing, and even be able to give them the platform to say what they have to say for themselves, because they are experiencing what is going on. They have parents who are experiencing what is going on, and they are the ones who will be there 10, 20 years, even after a lot of the adults are out of the system. So thank you, Aruba, for so much inspiring words coming from you. It's time for questions and answers. Questions from you, participants. If you could just type it in the chat, I think that would be great. Because of time, we wouldn't want someone to unmute and take a lot of time. So if you could just type in your questions, that would be great. And your comment as well. Do we have any question coming from anyone? Or maybe you can allow 3 people raise their hands and ask their questions. Any question from anyone? Okay, I see someone's hand raised. Brex, yeah. Can we unmute Brex to ask his question?
Sorry, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yes, great. First of all, thank you for everyone for the excellent presentations. I think everything was thought-provoking, and then I learned a lot from the presentations. I have a bunch of questions, but maybe I'll just limit it to 2. My first question, and it can be addressed to anyone. My first question is, aside from small island developing states, are there any other key regional groups or blocks who are calling for loss and damage finance? So that's my first question. The second one is, I'm just wondering what you think about the UN Secretary General's call for a windfall tax, and if you think this is significant in influencing or supporting L&D finance or climate finance in general. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. We're going to take another question. If that's okay with you, speakers, maybe we'll take 3 and then you answer all of them, if that's fine. Great. There's a question from Amara Jones. How can I be a member of the LDYC? Okay. Any other question from anyone? Then our speakers take the first round of questions. Okay, speakers. Oh, Alicia. All right, Alicia, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for your insightful presentations. I am Alicia from Peru. Well, I have a question in regards to financial, funding. We are now in a situation where a global north doesn't want to fund all the damage they cost. Has there been any discussions in the last COPs or any other meetings on external debt, because that's also a limitation for many global south countries on implementing and allocating part of their budget to adaptation and loss and damage activities. So has there been any discussions on that, on external debt reduction or even cancellation?
Thank you, Alicia. Sunil, you want to start?
Yeah. Thanks. Really, important questions in there. So first, who is calling for loss and damage finance? So if you go back to COP26 in Glasgow, there is this bloc called G77 and China, which comprise subgroups, including Small Island developing states, the least developed countries groups, the Africa group, basically most of the developing countries. I think there are 130, something developing countries who negotiate is the G77 and China bloc. So it was the G77 and China collectively that they put loss and damage finance facility in, they demanded that be established in Glasgow. They put that, categorically in writing. But what happened was, like, developed countries, pushed that away. They didn't even, that was not even allowed to be discussed in the negotiating way. The countries made the statements, but it was not allowed to be discussed in the negotiating setting. So that is the situation we came from Glasgow. So it's not only SIDS, it's the LDCs, it's the Africa group of countries, it's the Latin American countries, who also sometimes negotiate separately. It's other, developing countries, all of them together, demanding this loss and damage finance facility to be created. So that was the case in Glasgow, but we are yet to see, because, as of now, we see that, the negotiating groups are preparing their own strategy. They have demanded collectively again to put loss and damage in the agenda, but how collectively and strongly they will raise that demand in the negotiations, it's to be seen. But for that, people like us who are in the movements, the youth, need to create that pressure even in our home, with our own national government, so that they don't pull back from their own demands. Oftentimes we've seen that, giving away the pressure from the developed countries. So yeah, it's about, Iqbal also brought that issue of the inequality between the countries. These politicians, whether they happen to be in the developed countries or in the developing countries, they are not working for the common people, for the benefit of common people. So it's the economic system which favors, a few and makes, the many suffer. So we need to change that, but those are the two separate fights. So while we go to COP, the platforms like COP, it's about the developed countries who historically, created this problem and had the historical responsibility, need to pay. And there is this, demand of fair share. So what does fair share means is, the ones who are able to pay need to pay, based on their capacities. So it's not only, a few countries, but the rich countries, and but also the corporations. And coming into the question on windfall tax, so it's about, there is this discussion, about, what is the source to pay for loss and damage. So there are several sources being floated, including the financial transaction tax, the windfall tax, and levy on aviation and shipping, solidarity tax, taxing the rich, all sort of things. So these are part of the sources from which the money can be raised for loss and damage. As I said in my presentation, it's not about the lack of money, it's about the political will. And we know that taxing the filthy rich is the most important way to get that money and reduce that inequality, which is not only related to climate, but our own economic social inequality that exists in the world. So that is really important to push for that as well. And coming finally to whether the discussion on debt servicing, that cancellation is happening formally, it is not being discussed within the negotiating spaces, but several developing countries and several different organizations are raising this issue. So, and it is really important question. So, the fact that, despite having gone through that, emergency, Pakistan will have to continue to, allocate its national budget for servicing the debt this year. They will have to, continue to do that. It's the same with many developing countries who were, persuaded to take loans under different conditions, and then are having to pay, cutting, making spending cuts in social protection, in education and health, and they don't have anything left to deal with the climate impacts, including implementing actions for adaptation and also addressing loss and damage. So this is a really important issue. So that the issue of debt, the rich countries, canceling their debt, it's one important instrument, part of this package of dealing with this crisis financially. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Iqbal, do you have anything to say in response to the questions?
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree with Samir. And yes, it's also time for the developing nations to actually, stand together and ask for what they actually are left in the table with. Also, I think that, instead of the developed nations giving no loans for, bounce back strategies, they should actually review their decision of what they are doing right now. The people and the developing countries don't really need loans. They need what they are promised, and they need what they are deprived of. And I think it's totally now realistically on the developing countries and underdeveloped countries to actually stand up, to not focus on the developed countries to actually come and wait for them. It's on us, and I believe there are several other organizations that are working to help the domestic governments in every vulnerable state. But end of the day, it's only the national governments of each country that has actually have to make the point in front of the national governments and international tables. For that, we need to make sure that whoever is in the process should actually come out strong and present the things that are actually always ignored in front of the international community, for which I think people like Sunil and other Aruba and stuff. This is just tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of other people who are actually working on ground, but are not actually getting the real representation in the community, in the international tables and dialogues, where they can actually point out such things, because I've never seen the national governments coming out with such informative presentations and stuff. All I have seen is that asking for funds and stuff, because our government in developing countries only think about 4 to 5 years their future. Then they think about their tenure. They never think about the 50 or 500 years of the next generation. This is where the non-state actors play a role, and this is where we have to jump in and play our part to make sure that the coming generation should actually get something out of it. Uh, if not, we will see such events that are happening right now, more than what's in frequency right now. So, yeah.
Thank you, Iqbal. Aruba, do you have anything to say in response to the questions?
Yes, I think I agree with what our previous speakers pointed out about this question. It is truly an important issue today for us to have the real representation of the community, just as Iqbal said, in the negotiations tables. Without having a community, without the real representation of the community from all parts of the world, we cannot truly reach in a decision which will help us get help us get through this catastrophe.
Thank you so much, speakers. So before we move, maybe to a short second round of questions, second and last round of questions. Brex, I think your question saying if part of COP27 will be live streamed like last year. Yeah, I want to believe that that's going to happen. So maybe you could go on to the page, the COP27 site, and I'm sure you're going to get anything on live stream over there. I hope that answers your question. All right, last round of questions. Maybe some 2 questions coming in will be good, and then we wrap up. Anyone has any question? Last round of questions. Okay, looks like, oh, Shreya. Okay, Shreya, over to you.
Yeah. I was waiting for the end, like, because this question is not directly related to loss and damage, but like I wanted to know more from Sunil, or that because we have been organizing COP since the last 27 years. So this is the COP 27, and still the progress that we are making is still very, very, it's still very small. So and every year at the end of the year, like thousands of people, almost like I think in COP 26, almost 40,000 people going to Glasgow and join COP26. So how do you see the effectiveness of such conferences, and does COP have future? Because it does not show any progress on the ground, but even like other things from emissions to cost and the increasing issues of inclusivity. So it is being narrowed. So how do you see the future of COP? So I wanted to know that from you.
Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you. That's a really important question. And for people who, who've been into this process for long, what happens is like they get institutionalized, and, whatever happens within that, they see and, think is progress. But the reality is that, given the fact that we've come this far in a situation wherein, we are breaking all the tipping points, there is no going back, and only, the only thing we can do is like, minimize our suffering. So the COP process, it's been 30, more than 30 years when the UNFCCC was agreed, and 28 years actually, Shreya, because 1 year the COP couldn't happen because of the pandemic. So yeah, what I would say is that there is no real hope that this process is going to solve the problem that we have at hand. COP27 is not again going to solve the problems that we have at hand. We are not even sure if countries will agree to establish that facility. For that, we need to take two-pronged approach. One, understanding that this COP process is a failed process. It's not inclusive. As Aruba said, it doesn't represent children or even youth. Also, many other segments of society. It's a few privileged people negotiating on behalf of the majority of the humanity. So yeah, it is a flawed process, but it is the only process that is that is in there, in which countries can come together and debate this issue. There's no other space to talk about climate change if there is no COP. For example, Nepal sitting face and face with the US and asking that finance facility. So it is, from that perspective, it is an important platform. But having recognized that this process is not really working, we need to think beyond COP, because climate action is not, doesn't have, the decisions to implement climate action doesn't have to only come from the COP process. And having recognized that, several groups and several, individuals and groups have taken other steps. For example, there are communities in Indonesia who've gone to international court. Even in Germany, in several parts of the world, who've taken this legal route, asking, the courts to, deliver that justice, which has not been come through the standard process. Similarly, we've seen this big, movement to demand, to ask the UNGA to go, tell the ICJ, International Court of Justice, to give a view about an international advisory about, the human rights dimension of climate change. So that, there's a huge movement from the Global South, led by the Pacific, led by Tuvalu, sorry, the Vanuatu, the creating that pressure beyond UNFCCC that is happening. And we need to build on those, kind of, movements, those which are beyond, the COP process. From COP process, my best hope is that there will be an incremental progress, but what we need is a transformational change, which will not come from that process. As Aruba said, that will come from changing the system. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, Iqbal. Thank you, Aruba. Thank you, speakers, for these lovely presentations and these inspiring words. We're going to just take a picture. So if you just turn on your video, and we'll just take a quick shot just to capture this moment that you were part of our 4th webinar on loss and damage.
Are we done taking the photo?
I have taken one. Thank you, everyone. I think we've lost Margaret, might be due to her internet connection, but we're already at the end of the session. Thank you very much, speakers, for the insightful presentation and letting us know like what is really loss and damage and the history of that part. Thank you, Iqbal and Aruba, for sharing the stories from Bangladesh and Pakistan. So that was really insightful and like thought-provoking for us, us and making the session interactive. We will end our session here. Yeah, Margaret, you're back. Anything you want to say?
Sorry. Have you already taken our picture?
We have.
Oh, I missed. Anyways, that's okay. That's fine. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. And yes, the presentation will be shared. If you registered, you received an email, you will receive another email receiving the recording and the presentation. So thank you until we meet again for the next webinar. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.